Chidwa, chidwa, hulua, hulua. Hey, how you doing? Look at this wonderful color, green everywhere. And this is a fun memory palace that I'm creating right now, live, and wanted to answer a question. And, oh, by the way, Spider-Man says hello, and Spider-Man is our friendly neighborhood, web slinger and great creator of memory palaces. He's flying all over the place, swinging all over the place, and bringing good things to everyone. But what's really neat about this question that I got, can memory paralysis practice make you happier? And the answer is, of course it can. Of course it can. One of the reasons why is that it's creating so much autobiographical memory. By the way, if you're hopping on the call, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what time it is. Are you a big fan of Spider-Man? Did you see Spider-Man, by the way, the latest one, Homecoming? It was really, really cool. Lots of interesting memory palaces in there. Really contained spaces that are easy to construct in the mind. And when you watch a movie like Spider-Man and you think of the locations very strategically, then you have virtual memory palaces to play with, if you like. Anyway, thanks for hopping on and letting me know where you are in the world. I'm going to paint my grade 1 classroom. And, oh, Alex is here. Greetings from Pagosa Springs, Colorado. Oh, I love Colorado. 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Great to meet with you here, Alex. One of the things about this question of memory palaces creating happiness is that I have been to Colorado. I've been to Fort Collins, and it is a really, really great place. And I was there at the university, and so there's all kinds of memories coming up and memory palaces that can be created out of that. And so it's already creating happiness and joy. And I don't have all the MRI machines and so forth, but I think that if we put our brains inside of them, we would see that some happiness would come up there anyway. But we want to think about what this thing happiness is, right? What is happiness? I've always liked the ancient Greek concept, which is flourishing. When things are flourishing, when things are growing, when they're becoming more wonderful and profound. And I really think that that's a more interesting definition of happiness. Odysseus is here. What a great name. I'm actually looking to audition for the other comic book Spider-Man, a Spanish black Spider-Man. Love the film, from Virginia. We'll say more about that. That sounds incredible. Spider-Man's just like super interesting. When we think about the memory palace potential there, his bedroom, right, alone is so useful, and it's so memorable, especially the way they play it in that movie, how they use that room. And it's not any more or less memorable at the end of the day than the Tobey Maguire one, but it's just really interesting how to think about movies. And then you think of all the times that you read Spider-Man comics or all the movies, like where did you see different Spider-Man movies? And when you start to think about that, then you're unlocking your autobiographical memory, and this is a really powerful and profound thing to do. Anyway, Spider-Man, cool. What I'm going to do here is I wanted these colors for the memory palace because I remember very distinctly that grade 1 had a green carpet, and also there was an area where we actually did painting, and that painting had no carpet. There was also a secondary room, which was quite interesting, and I was often sent to that room for misbehaving and having to do additional assignments and so forth. But I wanted these colors because they are reminding me not only of the carpet, but also G.I. Joe, which I really loved. And that's like an interesting exercise, memory exercise too, is to think of your toys and think of the toys that you really liked, and then try to remember what they were called. So in the case of G.I. Joe, I mean, there's so many. I remember having a toolbox filled with them, or it was a fishing kit rather. This is so much fun, and so pleasurable to think about how even just the G.I. Joes were stored. We got a question here. By the way, keep your questions coming. We're and your hellos and your thumbs up to let me know you're engaged. And Odysseus says, how do you keep track of your memory palaces? Sometimes I use them for remembering acting lines or for remembering classical sheet music, but sometimes I forget the actual palace itself, LOL. Well, there's lots of ways to keep track of your memory palaces. One of the greatest ways is to actually create them with paint. Actually, this is the first time I'm painting a memory palace in acrylic. And so it's going to be an experiment. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I watched some YouTube videos, and that's how you do things. You learn by doing. And but I know from long years of practice with drawing the memory palaces that they are able to really help you remember them better just by drawing them. And when you follow the magnetic memory method principles for creating them, then you remember them even better. And then you don't have to keep track of them so much. But there's other ways of keeping track of them, such as how you actually name them and organize them. And that would be a more systematic approach based on methodology. But let's check in with who else has shown up. And I see Julie Adams here. Julie from Northern California. I've been watching the masterclass videos all day. I feel happier already. Oh, Julie, that's excellent. So glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're hanging out in the masterclass. Masterclass is just a great resource and so much fun. I got really interesting emails this morning and some memory palaces. And Julie, if you haven't seen it, some of those emails pertain to a new video that was placed Friday in the FAQ section. Some really fascinating questions. There's a new thing about memorizing product guides. There's some questions about pinyin, and even if you're not learning Chinese, I think you'll find them very instructive to your practice and increase happiness because of how it can guide your practice. Christian's here. Anthony just memorized Kipling's Conundrum of the Workshops in its entirety and realized few want to listen to a 5-minute poem well recited. Thanks for your encouragement. I want to listen to your poem recited. Alex says, Christian, don't let the so-and-sos get you down. Yeah, please don't, because listen, people might not want to listen to it recited now, and the people that are in the now might not want to listen to it recited, but you can find people who would just love to listen to you recite poetry. There's actually poetry readings that you can go to filled with people who are just desiring to hear people read poetry and recite poetry, and they don't mind. They call it a poetry cover, right? When the poem is not yours, that you didn't write it, and you're reciting it at a poetry reading, it's a poetry cover. So people are excited, and I don't know where you live, but I used to go to poetry readings all the time, and the covers were often my favorite part, especially when you recognized what the person was covering. And this reminds me, and this is like the whole thing about, does memory practice unpack happiness? Just all the happiness that I'm thinking of, the Toronto scene that I was quite, well, I didn't do that many readings, but I went to a lot of readings, and was generally involved in the small press scene and so forth. Just the joy of memory that comes up from there. Now, I never even thought of some of the stages where these readings took place. Now, new memory palaces. Really powerful to go through that. And on this note of cover poems, you've got to check out Steve McCaffrey doing the Marxist manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, sorry, in Cockney. I can't do a Cockney accent, or else I would do it for you. But not only has he turned it into poetry by translating it into Cockney, so it's actually homophonically represented in Cockney, but he also reads it in this accent, and it's like what the workers want. It's so hilarious. Really great. So yeah, definitely, as Alex says, don't let the so-and-sos get you down. Odysseus says, I get it that it will also help with visualization of the palace when you have a physical representation of the concept that you previously had only seen in the mind at a lower resolution. Yeah, or you saw in your mind at a higher resolution but didn't capture at the highest possible resolution It just depends. People have differences in how they experience visual memory, how they experience spatial memory, how they experience all kinds of memory, audio, and kinesthetic memory, gustatory, olfactory, conceptual memory, all kinds of memory that we have. And this is so much fun. You know, memory is such a beautiful thing, and just using it and conceiving of its power opens up so much in the mind and really allows you and enables you to experience elements of yourself that are lying dormant, but they're there right now. They're with you right now in this moment in potential. They're there in potential, and you unlock them. And so, of course, the opposite question here is, what do you do if exploring autobiographical memory through memory palettes creation creates bad memories or brings up bad memories? Actually, I do want to say creates bad memories, because we know that when memories are being brought forward, we're actually recreating them. They are being reconsolidated. They were split apart, stored in different parts of the brain, and then you need to reconstruct them, reposition them, magnetize them to put them into the present moment, so you can then process them through verbal communication to yourself or to others and so forth. So we really are creating our memories, and then we change them. What was the Cockney version of the poem? Julie asked. I'd like to hear it. It's Steve McCaffrey, and it's just the Communist Manifesto in Cockney. If you look up Steve McCaffrey poetry, then you're going to find a bunch of resources. I'll see if I can to find that. You know, I looked for some of that material that was on the, you know, version 1 of the internet, and it just seems to have gone away. A lot of stuff that used to be online that is gone. I see some people joining live. Thanks for saying hello. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, how you're feeling, and just how you're doing generally, and hit that thumbs up. Let me know you're engaged. Bad Boss here. Always good to see you. Odysseus says, when you started drawing, I thought about you were about to write in Hangul. Oh, that'd be cool. But yeah, Julie, one thing to look into where it might be still to this day would be, let me think, there's so many poetry resources online. So Buffalo University has a poetry university resource. That might be a spot. Yeah, it's got to be somewhere. So if we're not able to find it together collectively online while we're live together, then I can certainly see what I can do to find it later. But you definitely got to check that stuff out, because it'll open up so much of your thinking. It's really interesting what Steve McCaffrey did, and I don't want to launch into a lecture of poetics and so forth, but he's just really into the whole Langpo movement, or L equals A equals N equals G equals U equals A equals G equals E language, which is really cool stuff. They really thought about how poetry is, or language is, controlled by certain powers, and how that we can use poetry to arrest back some of that power and redirect some of that power. It's really a lot related to modern painting in some sense, and representation, because there's a tyranny of representation that poetry should be representing emotions or narrative or vignettes of life and so forth, in the same way that painting is supposed to represent scenes like fruit and mountains and people in drawing rooms checking their hymns, right? That's representational poetry or painting. And so one of the things that modernism did and yada yada was to break that and say, look, we could have in painting, right? We could have just red on a canvas, and that would be the representation of redness on a canvas. And then you would think differently about that. And so that's a lot of what was going on in some of the poetry that Steve McCaffrey did. Like, there's this great video. Oh man, I wish that I could find it. I used to have it on a DVD, but moving around so much, don't have it anymore, and I probably couldn't even play it on a modern computer because of how it was encoded. But he had this one thing where he wrote a poem and then he lit it on fire, and then he's reading it as the poem is burning on fire. Which is a great statement, right? The actual reading of the poem becomes the poetry as the poem is being burned. Anyway, he had a lot of stuff like that he did, which was really cool and really influential on a lot of just my thinking. Julie says, thanks, I'm a dialect coach, so it would be interesting to listen to. Yeah, it will. And I think that you would be just interested in general. You know, Steve McCaffrey was also part of the Four Horsemen, which was a real spoken word, but poetry that is sound poetry. And so it's not so much dialect, but I think you'd still be interested in it because they're really investigating sound, what sound means in relation to language, and it's just super exciting stuff. So if you go to YouTube, I'm sure you'll still be able to find Four Horsemen videos. And along those lines, Christian Book does a great rendition of Ursinata, which I recommend, and also Motorized Razors. I think you'd really like that. So Bad Boss says, I'm super excited, just got my alphabets associate to my major system. Excellent, excellent. That's cool. Love to hear more about that. Alex says, am I crazy to find parallels between painting a memory palace and Lynn Kelly's description of building a Lukasa memory aid as described in the memory code? No, you're not crazy. There's not the whole thing with Lukasa that's so exciting is exactly the same thing that is happening right here, right? So I am not making a Lukasa as such, but there is a very strong relationship between this and a Lukasa because we're integrating material from the mind, memory, with material out in the world. This is a spatial location. This canvas is space. Somewhere out there in the world, unless that my elementary school has been torn down, that elementary school still exists. It is space out in the world. And where these memories are chemically located in my brain is a space. It's a location in the world. And we're binding them all together. And a Lukasa is exactly that, so that later it can be decoded. And the power of the decoding process and its magnetism, so to speak, is very, very linked to the weaving of these different locations in a new presence of space, which is the now, right? And so we are now here in the now, and we're doing something very much like a Lukasa. And because I take these steps with my memory palaces, I have a different relationship to spatial memory. I have a different relationship to that place that's out there in the world somewhere. I have a different relationship to where it is located chemically in the locations of my brain, and it's all being woven together, bundled together in neural networks at a much deeper level, so that when I go and use this memory palace now, it's going to be much more profound, it's going to be much more accepting of whatever I put in there, and it's going to allow, in the recall rehearsal process, a deeper consolidation. And this, you know, we got to put the brain in the MRI and see if this is actually so, but I think it is so. I mean, all evidence points to it being so, and how could it be otherwise? We know that these kinds of activities bundle together information at a much deeper level in the neural networks. So it's well worth doing this kind of activity if you are a practitioner of memory techniques, in order to help bundle information better so that it's not dispersed so wildly throughout the brain. And what you're doing when you do this is you're actually strengthening the existing information, the information that's already there, so that when you layer new information on it, you're placing it on a firmer foundation rather than just willy-nilly, which is what most students do, is just willy-nilly popping stuff into the brain hoping it sticks. This is a much more strategic and magnetic approach, so that the information is going to do more than stick. It's going to consolidate and be responsive and be more weavable with other levels of information. It's really exciting how it all works. And the only way to really confirm it for yourself, like with meditation or some other mental practice, mental discipline, mental art, mental science, is to do it yourself and see. Because you can read all the books about the tradition of memory, you can read all the science about memory and so forth, but the thing that's always missing from the equation is you doing the tradition, doing the science, doing the art, and doing it well, because there's mastery. And those levels of mastery are attainable by anyone, any person who comes to the art of memory can attain it. And you've just got to get in there and do it. And so one of my ideas is also to learn painting. And I've done a lot with learning drawing and so forth over the years, and it's really helped my memory practice, and it's really helped create more happiness. Because, switching hands here, because how could it not? How could it not? You know, Riven Phoenix was one of the people who I invested in to learn drawing from. I actually ended up buying his course twice because I lost the files on one when I had to wipe a computer before I was moving, and gladly got his course more than once because it's so good. But he says something really, really profound there that changed me deeply. And I believe it would change anybody deeply. And what he said is that when you learn how to draw the human face, you will never experience the sensation of ugliness again. And it's been true. It's been true. And that is such a freeing and happy thing to not ever judge any human face like that again. It's so enriching. And then when you think back to all the judgments that you've made of other people in your life and you just forgive yourself, then that is freeing as well. And so that's how we unlock the dark side of exploring our autobiographical memory, is we realize that we're in the now, we're here and now, not then, and we're free from all that. And we don't have to judge the past, but we now see the past as an asset for creating a better future. And so these are just memory palaces. They're neither good nor bad. Grade 1 was a place in the world, and it is an asset. It's a wonderful, glorious asset. So this was a little side room, and even though I was sent there because I was a troublesome student a lot, I don't have to judge it that way. I don't have to think about all the bad stories and why I had so many behavioral problems and yada, yada, yada. It's just 4 corners in space and a desk that has also 4 corners. And these are assets, wonderful, wonderful assets to use while I'm learning Chinese, or whatever I might choose to use this memory palace for. It'll most likely be Chinese. And that's an exciting thing. It's exciting. And do you know how many grades there were in my elementary school? There were 7 so far. I've just done the whole actual school, but I've never done an investigation of each and every classroom. So this is going to be a profoundly useful memory palace, or a set of memory palaces, because we can think of the seashell structure of the entire building and the inner seashell structures within it, and think of it different ways. There are many untapped little areas inside of high schools, for example. If I think of where I went to grade 10, there's part of that I've never used as a memory palace, and that's just because of the larger memory palace structure and the seashell that I used for it, and so I just skipped over that area. But I have a nice memory with someone named Jackie in this one part, and it could be its own little memory palace. So it's really exciting what you can unlock. Odysseus says, in your experience, is it possible to go within a memory palace to access vivid memories, then a way perhaps through lucid visualization almost simulate the memory in your head? Basically, I'm looking at it kind of like reliving the memory, not unlike movies that have flashbacks and similar memory experiences. Well, sure, yeah, you can. And why not? Why not do that? There are some therapeutic practices that teach doing exactly that, and it can be very therapeutic. So, for example, in some of the things I've studied, what you might do is, in the case of, say there was a bad situation. I don't know what would count as a bad situation in an innocent, wonderful grade 1 classroom, but say that there was one and it was here, and I wanted to go in and create a kind of lucid visualization of that situation. Well, I got choices, right? I could try and do it through my eyes, as if I was in the first person situation all over again. I could see it from a top-down view. I could see it externally with all the players as if there was a movie camera there. Or I could try and see myself through the eyes of the bad actor who was, instigating the bad situation, or whatever the case may be. And there may be other options that I'm not thinking of that could cause, could open this up. And then once we had that scene opened up, we could play it through in different ways. We could play it through in color. We could play it through in black and white. We could play it through in slow motion. We could play it through in super fast speed. We could make it really, really big. We could make it really small. We could do all combinations of these things, really small in black and white, or really big in ultra color, and so forth. And in doing that, we could monkey around with our emotions. So if it was a really bad situation, then we could make it really fast and colorful and big so that it would just look ridiculous and we would laugh at it. Now, the question is that really therapy that's going to cure us and make us feel better and so forth? Well, maybe for a minute or two. There might be some more foundational work that we need to do on top of that, but it's certainly a way of getting different perspective on whatever happened there and having a laugh about it instead of being so serious about it and allowing it to torment and terrorize ourselves throughout the rest of our adult life. So we have options. Definitely have lots and lots of options. And just like with the Memory Palace, we have so many options of how much detail we want to put into it. But I'm very happy with the structure here, and just the memories that are coming up are so much fun. Thinking about grade 1. Odysseus says, what are some resources I could read or view? You said there are schools that teach this. Well, yeah, there's lots and lots of research. I mean, I'm referring a little bit to something called NLP, which has a whole world unto itself. I learned this because when I did my PhD, my research was on friendship, and part of friendship involves things like persuasion, and so I got into hypnosis and stuff. I actually took certification in hypnosis, and then I learned about NLP, and so you can look those things up. And there's just so many books that one could recommend, and so many weird characters, wonderful and wild characters to follow up on. That, yeah, it might be interesting to maybe interview some of those characters on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast and see what their take is on memory. There's a whole thing about whether or not hypnosis can help with memory, and I don't really see how that it could, other than that relaxation really opens up your creative imagination. It helps break down resistances that people have to recall and to creativity. And so that's really, really important. It's a part of the training. And I also think that self-hypnosis really is an odd thing. It's more like self-relaxation. And so one of the things that I did recently is to create 3 guided meditations, a Memory Palace Maximizer meditation and a general memory awareness meditation, and also a creativity meditation. But they're not meant to be hypnosis or anything like that, but they're helping you in a guided, relaxed setting unlock the potential of your mind for spatial memory and creative memory. And so that's a lot of fun. Ive Skins is here. Hi Ive, how you doing? Where are you in the world? Let me know if you're hopping on where you are in the world. Hit that thumbs up button to say hello. And Ive says, missed the beginning of the stream. What's the recap so far? Well, the recap is that yes, practicing autobiographical memory through Memory Palace creation unlocks happiness. It certainly does. And if you are funding research and you want to help me get an MRI machine, I'm sure we'll see that verified in the machines. But we need, as we talked about earlier, a definition of what happiness is. And so happiness, of course, I connect with eudaimonia or eudaimonia, or I'm not sure exactly what the way it would have been properly pronounced in ancient Greek, but it's often translated as flourishing, and flourishing, I think, is the best translation. And wow, happiness should be flourishing, and flourishing is happiness. One of the things about happiness is you want to unlock yourself from the tyranny of your own past, you know? And your best way of doing that is through memory, I think. I think it's the fastest way to unlock yourself from the tyranny of the past, because so many people are suffering unnecessarily and they're not living in the now, and that's because they don't remember to be in the now. And that's one of the interesting things, is how do you remember to be in the now? Well, one of the ways that you do that is you practice being in the now. And everything is built. Habits are built. Better memory is built. It's created by you, by developing the habits of better memory through a practice. And so is being in the now. Peyton says the past is not tyrannical, the attitude is maybe. You're right. I don't want to I don't want to reify the past. I don't want to make the past seem like it's an entity that has some special power that determines something. But our attitude to it, yeah, that's a good refinement. That said, how do we get there? How do we understand that? And we do it through practice. So one of the practices you can do is just self-inquiry and say, when you have things come up, and I think that they do come up with a kind of tyranny because of the way the brain works, the brain that we're trapped in, these memories come. What we can do is just say, where does this come from? And to whom is this experience of memory coming? And when you ask these questions, you'll begin to notice that you can't really answer to whom that it's happening. It's really weird. It's a weird experience because you just are living in the now. And there's this field, this screen, and things are appearing in it that are not really tangible in the way that we think that we are, and we can get some distance between ourselves and them. And by practicing this, like when you have a negative memory come up, say, to whom is this memory occurring? And when is it occurring and how exactly is it occurring? And you start to do self-inquiry on it, and you'll begin to see that actually any biological response that you've had to it can be lessened, it can be controlled, it can be focused, it can be defanged if necessary, simply by asking these questions. And so it's really powerful. Julie says, interesting idea about hypnosis used for gathering lost info of possible alien encounters or trauma. The relaxation aspect would certainly help. Well, yeah, I mean, this presupposes that aliens are encountering us. One of the problems that we've had, and I've talked about this on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast before, is that in some of the therapy sessions, Janet's here. Oh, well, welcome, Janet. So glad that you're here. Thanks for saying hello. From Manila. Wow. I want to go to Manila one day. One day soon. But one of the problems and the issues is that, well, and it has to do with how we recreate memory every time we access it, which is one of the powers of memory techniques, is exactly how you can get involved as the stage director of recreating your memories. Well, a lot of people in these therapeutic situations are actually helping people confirm the hypothesis and invent memories that never happened. And the scary thing is that when we invent memories that never happened, our brains are not necessarily good at distinguishing that they never happened. So I don't know if you ever saw these experiments, but there's some footage in particular where they have a young person, a young woman, go into an interview room, and she is asked if she remembers the fight that she had with her boyfriend on the front lawn, you know, at some year in high school. And she says, no, I don't remember that. And the interviewer says, yeah, the police were called, and you guys were even taken down to the station to help you sort out this problem between you. We've asked your parents, they've verified this. And the young woman says, no, I don't remember this at all. And they bring her back a week or two later, and they ask her, so have you, in the last week or two, had any more thoughts about this situation on the front lawn? And she says, you know, I was thinking about it, and yeah, I don't remember it in total, but I seem to have this feeling that, yeah, there was this conflict and the police were called. This never happened, but merely by the suggestion of the experimenter, this person began to invent a memory that never happened, and even agreed that something did take place. And that investigator helped it by using the suggestion that authorities in this person's life remember it, right? The parents. So it's really scary. It's really scary how we can come to think things happened that never happened. Now, as a magician, when I practice magic, this is one of the things that magicians really the best of the best are good at, is that they help you remember things that never happened, and you'll swear. And I'll never ever forget, you know, doing a magic trick for a friend of mine, and I legitimately created the illusion that an orange, a big fat orange, came out of a tiny little cup. But I've heard him retell that story so many times that a watermelon came out of the out of the cup. Now, the question is, why does he remember that it was a watermelon instead of an orange? And it's because of a magician's trick, which is to say that when I show that the orange could never, it must be magic because the orange could never have come out of that cup, I'd say the orange is the size of a watermelon, right? And it's helping the memory consolidate differently. And magicians do this all the time. And that's one of the reasons why one of the magician's rules, one that's often broken, is that you don't do the same trick twice. Now, technically, you don't do the same trick twice the same way twice, but you can do the same trick a different way twice. But you don't want the mind to see it again because it'll be able to construct the mechanism But magicians will often implant, knowing this about memory, they will implant words that help you remember the trick differently so the trick seems more profound than it was, and to amplify it. And they don't always know what the outcomes are going to be. Like when I said, it's like the size of a watermelon, I didn't actually expect that he would then remember that a watermelon came from the cup. But this is exactly what ended up happening, and it happens for these reasons that we're talking about, and the memory just works that way. So we need to be constantly vigilant over our memory, and it's really helpful to be vigilant over your memory, and you do it by practicing awareness in the now. And so this is fantastic. Memory is real, Peyton says, doesn't mean it's based on a real event. Well, is memory real? Is memory real regardless of what it's based on, or how? In this particular case, the realness has to do with agreement between people, right? That's the foundation of the law, for example. Real doesn't really matter in the law. What matters is the agreement, and how that agreement is then used to create consequence, and then it doesn't really matter what really happened. What matters then is the agreement. So real is you use the word here in one of your comments, slippery slope. Real is a very slippery slope in many cases. I've Skin says, really good podcast on the malleability memory and how eyewitness testimony. Search Adam Ruins Everything, episode 6, the malleability of memory with Elizabeth Loftus. Yeah, well, she's really cool, and I'd love to look this up myself. So thanks for mentioning that, I've Skins. If you would be so kind as to pop a link to that, that would be great. Bad Boss says, person's perception of their view alters the reality of memory. Yeah, we need to understand that, and this is where memory techniques are so powerful and why they work so well when you practice them, is that we are altering how the memories are stored in the brain, and we're deepening their relationship. And so when we recall them, then we're just really, really harnessing the power of what's going on anyway, amplifying it and getting it to work better. But these things often happen unconsciously, and those can have negative outcomes. So when you're learning a language and you want to have very, very good recall of vocabulary and phrases and so forth, then this is a real powerful asset, and its accuracy is stunning. It's absolutely stunning, and with practice it gets even more stunning. It's insane, right? But if you're not aware of this and you're not consciously participating in it, the inaccuracy of what you remember can also be equally stunning. And then Jenny, who was on the podcast recently and on a YouTube live about her memory loss thing, she's pointed out something really interesting, which is, in certain relationships, we'll have completely different memories and experiences of the relationships that we were in. So one partner in a marriage will remember something about the marriage, and the other partner will remember something completely different. How is that possible? Well, it's because each person has different focuses and so forth. But if you were learning a language together in that marriage, what you are remembering, you might say, well, no, on day 4 we didn't learn how to buy groceries, but you'll have this common source that will be correct or incorrect. So it doesn't really matter when you memorized it, but the vocabulary and the phrases will be fixed, and you'll either remember them accurately or not. And so that's where the real comes in, and where the real really is real. And then again, you still have, though, this flexibility, because when you learn a language, you might have learned on day 4 particular phrases, particular vocabulary, but by the time you get to day 44, you might be able to say all those same things in a completely different way. In a completely different way, with completely different vocabulary and different phrases, right? So that's kind of like a cool thing to think about, but it doesn't diminish the truth or the realness of the source material that you memorized. Really interesting aspects of memory to think about and explore. So yeah, lots of fun. Now, we've got the layout here. If you saw the pastel memory palace I was creating, that kindergarten was over here, outside of the range of this painting, and I had a whole different color scheme going on and so forth. I'm going to do more pastel. Got to learn more about pastel. I think pastel on paper is better than canvas, although some people were very kind to send me some tips on how to use pastel better for this. I'm going to not give up on pastel, but I wanted to try this kind of painting as well. I really like it, and I hope that you also will explore memory palace creation with more than just drawing. Here I'm using the bee yard jar here. This is really good honey here in Brisbane. Go to thebeeyard.com.au. Raymond is the guy's name, and really cool guy. Really great honey. This is like the best honey I've ever tasted in my life. Ever. Really great honey. So now, this is going to get a little experimental, because what I really want is to give this kind of a Giordano Bruno-esque expression of the lightness and the illuminance, the beautifulness of memory, the vibrance of it all. So I'm going to do an experiment and see if I can lighten this up and really bring out some illumination to my memory palace. And I keep thinking, you know, as I chatter along here, of all these autobiographical memories of grade 1. And I think of the people who were in that class with me. And I think of some of the events, birthday parties. And I think especially about this area here, because this area was where we did paintings, and so there was no green carpet there. But I can't quite call to mind what the color. Well, I guess it was a kind of gray, now that I think about it. Linoleum, I think, is the word. In any case, I really want to explore just giving this a nice luminous border. And I wonder how I can increase the vibrancy of all that. But yellow seems just so fundamental here, because one of my favorite memories of childhood is the sun. And the sun and the luminance of memory. So I'm going to explore an expression of that here. By the way, guys, keep your questions coming in your comments if you have any, and what you think about this whole idea of happiness and memory. We've had some great discussion here already about hypnosis and different aspects of the truth and reality, which is really exciting territory to get into. Bad Boss says, interesting topic, I'm a little lost. If memory practice increases happiness, then memory should be better, I'm thinking. Well, if you are finding that your memory is not getting better through memory practice, then you want to ask, what am I doing in my memory practice that maybe needs to be changed, maybe needs to be optimized, maybe needs to be improved? Because there may be room for improvement. And one of the things that I teach is making sure that you're directing your memory improvement at actual information you want to memorize that will improve your life. And that, I have found, is really, really key, because memory improvement as such is okay. There's a lot of interesting exercises. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful things you can do. But if they're not directed at helping you remember information that's making your life better, then what use is it really? So, well, I mean, there is a use, though. There is a use in memory improvement as such. But I think you get memory improvement as such by, I don't think, my personal practice is very much this case, and I see it again and again and again from the magnetic memory method students, is that memory improvement as such, when it is attainable, comes from practice that has practical outcomes. And then you're able better to focus and direct your memory practice at just incidentals in everyday life. So if you, for example, are learning Chinese like I am, which has a lot of tone memorization, well then my numbers automatically go up. My numeral memory goes up because I'm using the tools of numeral memory at a much higher level, which is great because I don't really use the phone, and so my recall of my own phone number has gone up when I need to give it, which is pretty funny. It's kind of like a running joke when people say, "What's my number?" and I'm just like, because I give it so infrequently, I'm like, okay, so Sartre and Baz, and then Johnny Cash, and then the Mash, and then a fascist. So, you know, if you know the major method, you now know my number. But it's really, really funny how that just gets better through use, and it's coming from Chinese. It's so exciting. So you gotta really be cautious that you're using your memory for goals. Ive says, I don't think links can be posted, maximumfun.org, Adam ruins everything. Well, it may not be clickable, but at least people can. Thank you very much for that, Ive. I really appreciate that. That's great. And it's great to share resources like that for people to follow along and to enjoy. Really pleased about that. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm starting to see some sunshine. I don't think that it's making this memory palace any prettier, but letting the sun hit and just thinking of all the sun experiences that were so important. I was telling April last night, one of my profound childhood memories that has unlocked a new memory palace is how that we used to beg and plead my mom, my brother and I, that we'd be allowed to stay out later based on the sun. And we would say, but there's still some sunlight out there, because we'd have to come in. That was the rule. We had to come in when it was dark, when the sun went down. And we would beg and plead and say, oh, but there's still sun, there's still sun. And we would really say, oh yeah, but there's some starlight or whatever, or the moon is really bright now and it's still like the sun, and we would have every argument about why we should be allowed to stay out just a little bit longer. Didn't work often enough, but just imagine that lust for being outside so strong that you'd put up a fight to be allowed to stay out longer. Amazing to have these memories. And then, you know, I think of the porch, how underutilized that porch has been for so many years as a potential memory palace, and it was there all along. Crazy. So when you think through your childhood, you can always find new memory palaces that you probably haven't been using, but that you could be using if you wanted. It's really exciting how unlocking autobiographical memory will almost always and universally also unlock spatial memory, because where else does your autobiographical experience take place other than in a location, right? And by going through autobiographical memory, you're always unlocking locations, and then that creates memory palaces. And also it creates figures for use in your memory palaces, which is also very, very exciting, because then you get better at your memory practice and you have more practice that improves your memory. Very, very exciting. And this memory palace is fun, especially the sun. I think the sun is very good. But I do not think this is a great expression of artistry here. So I'm wondering what I can do to amp this up. But I see we got a nice question here from Bad Ba. Is there any documented memory quotes or application from ancient Egyptian times? Examples of the god Anon believed the invention of letters will weaken people's memory. Interesting. I was looking into this. I did a lot of research while I was in Cairo until that I fell off the camel and had to lay on Ollie Richards' floor for quite a long time to make sure that my back didn't get worse. But that is a very interesting question, and I need to pick up again on the that method, that inquiry, because I'm very interested in ancient Egypt. And of course the whole ancient Egypt question is interesting because there is just so much ancient Egypt. We're talking something like 7,000 years, and it's great. But what I can tell you is that Cairo has a lot of cool memory palaces that I was able to get together despite having had to spend so much time on Ollie's floor. But let me pick up what you were saying there about the alphabet potentially reducing memory. And this is something that Lynn Kelly, who wrote the memory code, talk about on our episode of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. We talk about this problem, this issue of, how we're going in many ways to a new hieroglyphics with emojis and LOL and all of these crazy things that the hip kids are using to express what's going on in their minds and so forth. And so there is this fear that because there's so much conceptualness involved, that our visual capacity, our creativity is going down. I don't know if it's true or not, but it is an interesting consideration, and it's a great question. It's always going to come down to a very simple answer, though, is that no matter what's happening in the world, what are you doing in your practice? What are you doing in your practice, and how are you aligning that with real outcomes that make your life better so that you feel happier? So I really appreciate the ability to think about that, but I don't know that the invention of letters will weaken memory as such. But as Lynn and I were talking about, there is the potential, and maybe the very real potential, that it reduces visual imagination because we're not looking at pictures as much. I'm not sure, though. I think that we need to explore that more, and it always comes down to our personal practice. And we have the mistake in the history and the tradition of memory, one that I'm hoping to correct and working to correct. We have the mistake that there's so much visual stuff involved in the memory arts anyway. That's been a misconception, and it's at least as early as Aristotle in memory, where actually, if you think about Aristotle and memory, it's not really expressed as visually as it seems, this beautiful art and tradition and science that we have. So there's the wax tablet metaphor, and there's also the aviary metaphor. And those are visual to a very limited degree, actually, when you think about it. We're talking about the kinesthetic nature here, the feeling, the impression of information as a kind of physical entity into wax. And we know that actually information maybe isn't physical, but our brains are chemically physical, and there is the dispersion throughout the brain in a physical way. And if the brain is an information storage and retrieval device, not in the same way as a book or a computer is, but nonetheless shares these functions of storing and allowing us to retrieve information, we need to understand that it is not primarily a visual activity. Visuality is in a hierarchy of other forms of representation. And when you really dial in on the range of representation centers, let's call them, or capacities that the brain has, and then you understand your own learning hierarchy, then you can direct better practice out of that. And so if we worry about the alphabet reducing our visual capacity for imagination, for recall and memory and so forth, well, that a lot depends on whether you're even a visual learner in the first place, because you might not be. That might be very low in your hierarchy and not very high. And so we need to really be fair about the differences between people in that and know more about ourselves and our own hierarchy. This is going to be taken up, not going to be, it's already done, just waiting now for the final layout. But I talk about this a lot in my new book that will be coming out soon. Julie says, I've only been working with this for a couple of weeks, the magnetic memory method, but what I notice the most is a kind of internal effervescence that I think comes from my mental stimulation. Fun. Yeah, that's why I'm focused so much on the light here, Julie. I'm grateful that you raised that point. It is this internal effervescence, and this is something that has been raised in the memory tradition, the art of memory, for a long time. Augustine picks up on it. It's in Bruno, of course, and in your practice, which is excellent. And it is so freeing, and so it's kind of a feeling. It's a kind of, I was going to say enlightenment, but I'm not sure. I heard an interesting guy who was saying that if you suddenly feel like you're enlightened, you should actually be embarrassed, because all enlightenment is realizing the self, and you were the self all along. And so if you suddenly are enlightened and you've realized the self, then you should be ashamed that you suddenly woke up, which is kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. But what I'm thinking here is not of enlightenment, but I'm looking for the word elucidation. And that's what I think that memory practice does, is it creates elucidation, and a very profound elucidation, which is a pleasure. It's a pleasure, and it's a power. It's a power that you can then take forward into your everyday life to improve your everyday life and improve the life of the people around you. Improve the lives of everyone that you come into contact with. And so I love that word. I love that word effervescence, from mental stimulation. That's exactly what's going on. So many of us are so understimulated. We're understimulated because humanity is telling itself a very, very nasty story right now. It's telling us that people are telling each other that the human attention span is now less than a goldfish. What a terrible lie this is. What a disgusting lie, actually. Your attention span is not less than that of a goldfish. First of all, there's really very few parallels between your brain and the brain of a goldfish. And not only that, but when you're interested in something, you have all the attention span in the world. So a lot of the problem is that people are exposing themselves to things that they're not genuinely interested in. So of course you have no attention span for it. Expose yourself to more things that you're interested in, your attention span will go up. There's no attention span problem. There's no diminishing of attention span. But there is the nasty, self-fulfilling prophecyness, if I can say it that way, of people buying into this nonsense story that attention span is being eliminated or depleted or going down to goldfish status. No, what's going up is more and more information that's not worth paying attention to. What's going up is more and more information that people don't connect with. So let's get this story sorted right and start telling ourselves a better story, because our attention span is just fine. It's just fine. Might need practice, might need development if you have particular goals and you're in line with those goals, and you might not feel focused when you go to this or that lecture. So maybe what you need to do is get your sleep in order, get your diet in order, get your attitude in order and go and tell yourself a different story about your attention span. Learn how to take notes better. If you haven't heard my episode of the podcast on note-taking, magneticmemory-method.com/note-taking, I think you'll find some elucidating effervescence there for your practice, so that you don't have to tell yourself this BS mythology. And it's a mythology that makes people unhappy, because they're like, oh, my attention span is less than a goldfish. It's not true. And if you accept it as true, your happiness will most certainly, without a doubt, go down. Because of course that's an unhappy thing. Of course, that's a terrible, terrible story to accept. All the more terrible because it's absolutely 100% not true. It's not true. Although, if you're exposing yourself to boring information, and life is too short for boring information, if you're exposing yourself to negative information, then of course you're not going to have an attention span for that. But you can't say that your attention span across the board is like a goldfish's attention span. This is silly. Of course, the goldfish bowl metaphor might be more interesting, because a lot of people are locked up in a goldfish bowl of their own making and choosing in some cases, and in other cases not of their own making and choosing, but they have to find a way to perceive the bowl and get out of it. Mikhail says, I just love it. Great to see you here, Mikhail. Appreciate you saying hello. If you're hopping on and you haven't said hello yet, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world. And let me know, we're now talking about happiness and attention span and memory. And I'm really a strong and outspoken advocate that we all have all the attention span we need if we put ourselves in the places where we're actually motivated to be there. We're motivated to be there. Iveskins says, I have found a lot of value in the ACT book, The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. One of the key ideas there is that happiness comes out of living in line with your values. Yeah, well, I think so. I'm quite a fan of Nietzsche, and I don't say that Nietzsche has all the answers to everything, but he's very much in tune with the idea that you have the opportunity to really think about your values and create better values than the ones that are on offer a lot of the time. And so, yes, create your own values, but make sure that you're creating the values that you actually want, right? And that they're not affirmative of ideologies and practices that you don't want, because that will just lead to problems. And I'm glad that you raised that, actually, because if you know Nietzsche, then you probably have come across the myth of the eternal return. And myth of eternal return basically says, if you were doomed to repeat this life eternally over and over and over again, this day eternally over and over and over again, you know, is it that would you be okay? Would it be acceptable and even something you would embrace? Would you embrace the curse of living that day over and over and over again? If the answer is no, then you need to look at every day you live, every moment of every day that you live, and live it in such a way that you would be overjoyed to have the curse of the eternal return. And that's just a great way. And then Nietzsche, of course, said that we'll always have myths, but we can choose actively what myths that we have. And if we can just get enough of us together and pick better myths, well then, we're in a position to have some very, very good lives. And so the same thing, myth or metaphor, right? This is why I have to say, we got to throw this goldfish attention span metaphor out the window, because it's not true, it's disempowering, and there are better ways to think about attention span, and you have all the attention span that you need if you just put yourself in places where you can practice the extension of your attention span, and even places where you don't need to extend your attention span at all, because you're just overjoyed overjoyed to be doing that thing again and again and again. If you were doomed to do that thing again and again and again, you'd look back over the repetition and you would say, that was a good life. That was an empowering life. That was a life of elucidation, of effervescence, of, you know, light beaming through. And you can do it. Everybody can do it. Everybody can do it. Get in line. Get on board. Ives says, I think these kind of autobiographical memory palaces could be a great way to identify and make available the things that truly matter to you. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole purpose, is and then you go a step further and you use the memory palaces to memorize information that's going to improve your life, make your life better, and bring you greater satisfaction so that you can live a better life, because you have now learned things and you have the certainty of having learned them. So, Mikhail says, hello. So great that you're here. Thanks for saying hello, and thank you too for letting me know that you love this kind of material. I appreciate it very much. And Bad Boss says, I sometimes struggle with making information interesting so I can chunk it and encode it. Something I'm working on, studying complicated materials. Yeah, you know, this is a common problem, and it has to do with ego, really, at the end of the day. No ego, no enemy. It's just information, you know? If you start telling yourself a story about the information and how boring it is and yada yada, well, it's gonna be boring. I could do that all day long with Chinese. Every Chinese word that I encounter could be boring. A lot of ways, the practice of this is refusing to tell myself that story. Refusing to tell yourself that story. Tell yourself a different story. It's the most exciting information in the world. Even if it isn't, find the excitement. Look at the contours. If the letter C is in there, whoa, C is for cookie, and that's good enough for me, or whatever, however, you know? You just find it. Find it. Everything is exploding with the potential for joy, the potential for happiness, the potential for contentedness, the potential for better practice. Every letter. So, to go back to this concern that, you know, maybe the alphabet is reducing our visual imagination. If so, that's by choice, because I just think of the letter C and I start making associations. Cookie Monster. See the letter D, Dracula. See the letter E, Ernie, also from Sesame Street, right? And it's just like, you don't have to live any other picture except for the one that you want. And if you just wake up and get this moment now, and that everything is exploding in the present moment with the potential for excitement, then no information needs to be difficult. All information is equal. Mikhail says, that is true, Anthony. Find happy pictures are stories that makes the boring, hard stuff more fun. Yeah, the truth is there is no boring information. There is no dry information. There's only you telling yourself the story that it's not the most exciting information in the world. Tell yourself a better story. Dig in there. Yeah, sometimes you got to get in the knife and like crack through the dark skin, pull it away and find the juice inside. But there's just a wonderful orange radiating flavor in everything. In everything. And then you use your memory to connect it to even more exciting and effervescent information. Janet says, ACT by Russ Harris helped me, also The Mindful Way Through Depression. Yeah, I mean, look, be a seeker. Always be seeking, always be reading. And then you'll always be cool. ABC, always be cool. Always be cool. I think that too many people, they put a finality on things. They think, oh yeah, when I read this book or when I read this, then finally I'll get there. There's no final. There's just the now. The now. And in the now, you can decide to always be seeking. And everything that you have is right here. Right here. Bad Boss says, nice, all information is equal. All information is equal. Absolutely. How could it be anything but equal? We're here in this field, right? If you look, all you have is this screen that you live in, and everything that's in it is potential. Now, this is not a woo-woo, mystical, la-di-da stuff. It's not anything like that. But if you really do self-inquiry, you really ask the question, what is here now? It's all, oh, I almost dropped my painting, my paintbrush. It's all equal. It's all in the now. It's all effervescent. And it's all for you to approach in empowering ways instead of disempowering ways at every moment. At every moment. And that's why self-inquiry is such a powerful tool. And of course, the art of memory is a form of self-inquiry. Because what we do is we use memory palaces to help us place information that we want to remember. And then we just ask ourselves, well, what can we do to associate this? And then we go back into the memory palace and we say, what was happening there? What did we do there? And then we decode it. And decoding done well, practically on autopilot, gets the information into long-term memory. It's the most exciting thing in the world. Works like gangbusters. It's so exciting and amazing how that it does so much for you. I want to do a little experiment here because I'm trying to get this effervescent quality going. No, it's already dry, so I'm not going to be able to spread it. Although, maybe if I get it a little bit wet. Let's pour some water into my palette here. Experiments with paint. What an exciting session today. So excited that you're all here. Thank you for being so active and engaged, for hitting that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world if you haven't already, and say hello. Mikhail says, like in the song, Don't Worry, Be Happy. Yeah, that's a great song. Do, 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 do. No, that's not really gonna do anything. Oh well, have to learn that these paints dry real fast unless I put a retarder in them. Retarder. Funny word. Interesting word. Well, I've got the basis here anyway, going on, the idea. I'd like to learn how to make this more vibrant, more shooting with light. And I guess the way to do that is just to practice painting more. And then later, of course, actually use this memory palace to help me memorize some Chinese, which I will gladly do. It's going to be a great one. So many cool memories coming up about grade 1. Who here remembers grade 1? I'd love to do a little quiz. Like, how much do you remember? Ismo is here from Delray Beach, Florida. Great to meet you here today from Delray Beach. I've never been there. I've never been to Florida. I'd love to go to Florida. I think Florida probably is one of the most exciting repositories of memory palaces on the planet. Looks like it. I've seen lots of videos from the beaches and these apartment complexes overlooking the beaches, and it just looks like memory palace Mecca. I would love to visit there one day. Well, we're talking about happiness, and of course, just even though I've never been there, I'm calling to mind one video in particular that I saw with all these apartments in the back, and that just makes me very happy. Also to think of the potential of one day being able to visit Florida. I know people who live in Florida. Of course, a lot of Canadians like to go down to Florida. So I have people to visit. Banu is here from India. Hello, Banu. I also want to visit India. I'll bet you any money that India is chock full of memory palaces just waiting to happen. Just waiting to happen. Just got to get there and partake in the locations. I studied sitar for a number of years, and I was thinking of getting back into it, and it appears that here in Brisbane that there's a sitar teacher. So I got to make a a decision and get another sitar. But then the question always is, when it comes down to happiness, might create more memories, but will another object in my life really do it for me? And will learning sitar again, studying sitar. Sitar is an interesting instrument to study, lots of aspects to it. Then, get another Mizrab. But that created some real interesting memories while I've been thinking about it. And then, on this question of hurtful memories or painful memories, there's a little bit of hurt there that I got rid of my sitar. And my teacher had given me a real nice Mizrab that had been dipped in the Ganges, and I gave it away with this sitar. But that was the right thing to do at that moment. So it's okay. And it's okay to feel that little twinge of regret. That's all that it is. A little memory. But doesn't need to be painful. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Whoops. But you know what? We make little mistakes here and there. Just like that one. We can just fix that later. No big deal. But yeah, memory does not have to be painful at all. So Iveskin says, I remember the new entrance teacher played an auto harp and read from big books. Okay, cool. What's new entrance? I don't believe I've heard of new entrance. There's so many great teachers out there, though, that's for sure. And that's one reason to start studying something like sitar again. And of course, I wasn't using memory techniques when I learned sitar originally. So now I can imagine not only picking up certain things a lot faster, but being able to help people with their questions about memorizing music a lot better. Although, again, it would be another stringed instrument for me. I just kind of don't feel like picking up piano at the moment, although we do have a piano to play in the home. It's pretty clear to me how it would all work, but I don't like to go around teaching things that I'm not doing. So I have some thoughts on it that I talked about, but Harvinder's here. Hello, Harvinder. Great to meet with you today. And Badbot asks, what kind of guided meditation do you practice? Well, I tend not to take guided meditations, but what I do is I have created a guided meditation. And that guided meditation now, there are 3 recordings that I've put together for people to explore. And one of them is the Memory Palace Maximizer. Then there's a creativity meditation, and then there's just a general memory awareness meditation. I'm really excited about them. So far, the feedback has been phenomenal from people who are taking them. But in terms of my meditation practice, actually I should make a shout out to Bruce Langford, because he was kind enough to have me on his podcast, Mindfulness Mode, and mindfulnessmode.com. Go check that out. His podcast, a lot about meditation. And I shared on there some of my meditation practices. So get subscribed to him, and you'll be notified when that interview comes out. Talk more about my meditation practice. In general, I try to make sure that I'm meditating all the time, which doesn't end up happening. But the more that I practice, the more I do spend in awareness. And the most powerful thing is what we've been talking about a lot today, which is self-inquiry practice. And that is a way of constantly being aligned in the now as much as possible. Constantly. Got to be careful with our definition of what constantly means. But how it works, and ultimately what it comes down to, is having multiple forms of meditation that you work on. Oh, I see another guy down there also painting. Whoa, cool. Nice. So the balconies of Brisbane are alive with the effervescence of memory today. But I tend to do a Shavasana upon awakening. I find that my mind is particularly busy in the morning, so it's really important to get on the meditation right away. And in Shavasana, which is a kind of corpse pose, I do some breath withholding practice. And breath withholding practice is cool because it makes it really difficult to think. Because first of all, you're counting while you're breathing, and you're doing things with oxygen. By the way, go see a doctor before you do any breath withholding practice, please. This is not medical advice at all, except for the advice to go and get medical advice. But breath withholding is powerful. It's very, very powerful. So I do some of that. And then I get up and I do some yoga, stretching. I do like Russian martial arts yoga and just some other stuff, yoga, that I learned from Happiness Beyond Thought by Gary Weber. Check that book out. Really powerful book. Very mathematical in its approach to happiness. And then I do a standard formal sitting meditation that will also use breathing. And then I will do some journaling, which I also consider very much meditation, and then do some memory practice, which is meditation. And I will do music at some point in the day, which I also connect with meditation. It's very meditative and uses your memory to play music, to practice music, to learn something in music. And then in the evenings I'll do stretching again, and there's computer curfew, which is very powerful for meditation as well. And I would connect it with meditation because it's an awareness of the fact that you're going to do something, and it's encoded in the mind. And what is meditation other than the practice of awareness? So why not call that meditation as well? I think that's fair enough, wouldn't you say? Would you agree? So I hope that answers your question, Bad Ba. It's multiple forms of meditation going on. And then self-inquiry, of course. Self-inquiry is when a thought comes up and you just ask, who's having this thought? Where is this thought taking place? When is this thought happening? And then you're back in the present moment real quick. And this actually trains your brain to think differently or to not think differently. I'm not sure exactly how I word it. Not really a scientist of meditation the way that I am a scientist of memory, but it's very empowering, and I highly recommend taking it up as a practice in your own life. And you can learn a lot about it. And then again, it's not really about enlightenment as such, although I like to use that word enlightenment, but as I heard in a talk this morning, that if you ever pronounce, hey, I'm enlightened, you should probably be ashamed that it took you so long. Because all you're doing is realizing the self, the true nature of the self. And when you have that, I mean, I don't think you should really be ashamed, but the teacher was saying that for the reason that, you were there, you were yourself all along. And so to suddenly jump up and say, I've realized that I am myself, would be kind of embarrassing. Because it took you that long, but we all have our own timeline, and maybe some of us will get it, some of us won't. Janet says, could happiness and memory palaces be around the fact that you are deliberately creating memories rather than them being put there by life events, big or small? This is so, yeah. Yeah, because you're drawing upon an asset that's there, and you're actually doing it in a way that's creative. And you're directing the evolution of your memory, and you're setting the stage for future memory. And any time that you are putting yourself in a position of power, let's say, control, which, with my hats off to one of my favorite quotes from William S. Burroughs, control seeks to control control. So you might be just giving yourself the fantasy, the illusion of creating control, but nonetheless you are actually controlling or setting the stage for better memory in the future. So that's bound to create happiness, because happiness, as our definition for today anyway, that we've been working with, is that happiness is flourishing. And so you're flourishing your future memory. You're actively allowing it to flourish. You're creating the garden in which it can flourish, and it will flourish if you tend to it. It'll flourish and be even better than you can possibly imagine. It'll be more receptive than you can possibly imagine, unless that you're not using it. But if you're actively using your memory, it's going to flourish. It's going to reveal things to you that you just have no idea how much memory you have in your life unless that you are actively using your memory all often and frequently. And then, of course, this is interesting to think of in the context of meditation and really arriving at being more present in the present moment, is that memory, of course, can whisk you away out of presence. But then you can use self-inquiry to say, well, who exactly is having this memory? And when? And how? And what's going on? It's really empowering. Really, really powerful. Let's check in. We got some comments coming. Thank you guys for all your wonderful interaction and your comments. And keep those thumbs up coming. If you're joining and you haven't said hello, let me know where you are in the world. Benu asks, how can you improve your speed in learning something? Well, if you haven't taken my free course, please do. That is my go-to way of improving the speed. Speed comes from having reliable techniques and using information to practice those techniques and keep those techniques sharp and using them frequently, and then exploring other techniques as well, not being satisfied, but you got to start using techniques that allow for you to grow in speed, allow you to develop speed and to feel speed and to test speed so that you can improve speed. And then, of course, you also want to think about the quality of slow, because it's not always about speed. It's also about depth of experience. And some things might require or might be faster as a direct consequence of being slow instead of in a hurry all the time. So this is where knowing your learning hierarchies really comes into play, really is a powerful asset to you. And if you invest a bit of time in your learning hierarchies, then you're going to go so much faster, because you'll go to the ways that you learn the best and the fastest first, rather than going with the ones that are not as powerful first, which is what a lot of people do. They go to the least effective learning modalities for them first, instead of going to the most effective learning modalities first. And that's because they just don't know what's most effective for them. And yeah, a lot of this is unfortunately not taught in school, but you can learn. And I would recommend you taking the course at magneticmemorymethod.com to learn how we in the Magnetic Memory Method family approach learning faster, knowing that sometimes the path to learning faster begins and takes little trips into the realm and the realms of learning slower. So that's very, very powerful. And you know, there's a lot of material about that on a recent podcast episode for note-taking. So if you haven't heard that, go to magneticmemorymethod.com/note-taking. And while you're there, click those share buttons. Let other people have the opportunity to find these resources for themselves as well. I'd really appreciate that. And they would appreciate it also. Janice says, Nancy Klein has some great stuff on paying attention to improve quality of thinking. She talks about listening with fascination to where someone is going with their thinking. Yes, and this is something that's lost with these people who like to brag about their attention span being so low and snappy. Because if you just decide that your attention span is the size of a goldfish's attention span, and then you're not practicing active listening, active learning, practicing extending your attention span, giving your attention span the opportunity to flourish and to grow, this is a crime that you're doing to yourself and a crime to all humanity, because you want to sit and learn with fascination, practice fascination with information, practice fascination with the moment that you're in, and tapping into and unpacking all the value in that moment without judging it, without judging your attention span in that moment, and just diving in and allowing the clarity of the moment to be like a tea bag in warm water, steeping until it gets just right. And then when it gets right, maintain it. And that's what's going on in that note-taking podcast. It's sort of teaching you how to get it just right and then maintain it. So you're paying attention, taking notes, and really maximizing the power of the present moment instead of diminishing it by telling yourself a negative story, but rather telling yourself an empowering story, and then you can experience that empowerment. And with practice, you don't even have to do it. It just happens on autopilot, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. Wonderful thing. So let's see. I've asked me, when I talk about Russian martial arts, do I mean systema? Yeah, that's what I mean. I miss systema a lot too. It used to be held here in Brisbane, I saw, but there are no classes going on currently, although maybe I can still get some one-on-one training. Banu says, yes, sir, definitely. Thank you for answering my question. You're welcome. You're welcome. And I look forward to hearing from you in the future about how things go for you. There's great, great value in learning how to learn fast, but also not neglecting the slow. Systema is a great one. I mean, I didn't really start learning systema properly right away. I had to have a couple teachers before it was really unpacked for me, and then I found the right teacher, and wow, I really accelerated. Then we started doing blind sparring and knife sparring. Wow, that really unlocked a lot of my brain and a lot of my spatial capacity as well, because until that you're sparring blindfolded, you're not really thinking about what space really means. And until that you're sparring with a knife, you're not really thinking about a lot of stuff. And that's why doing is how you learn. You learn by doing. Now, I'm not recommending you go out and spar with knives, because I actually, when we think about memory and happiness, I do have this cringe-worthy memory where I almost took out my teacher's eye with a knife. And it's not even worth laughing about. It's not good to laugh about that. But it really freaked me out, but it taught me a lot about care in the moment and so forth. But he almost took out my eye too, so, just be careful. Be careful if you're going to get into those things. But you'll learn a lot by doing. And you learn a lot about space. And that's a great memory palace also, where I studied Systema in a couple towns, but the Vancouver Systema place, school, club, whatever, was, wow, what a great, great room. Glad I have some pictures of it. Glad I have some pictures of that. Oh, Stacy's here. The Aphantasia girl, Aphantasia. Great, how are things going with your exploration of memory with Aphantasia? And how do you prefer to pronounce it, actually? I know that I would have pronounced it Aphantasia, but I heard Penn Gillette saying Aphantasia. Not sure that the pronunciation matters too much, but I'm curious. And I'm curious to catch up with you and see how that's going. I mean, it's interesting that your nickname is the Sparkling Star, which is both a visual kind of signature, but sparkling is also a texture, a state of being, one that even brings to mind sound, like sparkling soda. You can feel sparkling soda in your mouth. You can hear the sound of sparkling liquids and so forth. And then when I think of a sparkling star, the sound of, like a sparkler. So This is a thing that a lot of people don't realize, aphantasia or not, that if you don't feel particularly visual, that doesn't mean you can't use memory techniques. That doesn't mean you can't be creative. It just means that maybe you don't have a mind's eye. But there's so much more potential. So much more potential. So Stacy says, the only way I know is by talking or writing. It's the only way I get to memories, or if I smoke marijuana, which is not often. I'm very pure, I feel. Well, interesting approach. I'm not sure marijuana is the path to better memory, but I don't know. I wouldn't judge it. If it's a path to better creativity, then of course that would definitely create better memories. And you know, we have a lot of things that can help us in the way of substances and so forth. But talking or writing, these are great tools for memory. Excellent tools. Well worth exploring. Jaideep is here. Nice to see you. Thanks for saying hello. Having a lot of fun today. A wide-ranging conversation, and I see from all those thumbs up, hit me with another one, that people are indeed experiencing some happiness, which is great. And the whole point is that memory is a great path to happiness if we have a good, solid definition of happiness that serves us. That's really important. And I think that there is maybe the potential for a universal definition of happiness that can serve many more people. Won't serve everyone, I'm sure. Some people will choose unhappiness. There's great meaning to be had from unhappiness. We know this. We know that many people need meaning, and they need it badly, and a fast path to get it is to have unhappiness and associate unhappiness with the rationality and the reason and the justification for why things are not going the way that they want, which is kind of sad. Stacy says, I need simple tasks for memory. I get overwhelmed easy, not sure what to do other than what I know. I try to follow law of attraction. What do you mean by simple tasks for memory? If you mean simple memory exercises, well, a very simple one would be to create a memory palace. And if aphantasia is getting in the way of doing something like this, then do a verbal, written memory palace. That's totally an option. You can make memory palaces with words. Words are always an option. Always an option. Well, this has been a lot of fun. And I'm not sure what to do next here with my memory palace, other than then to start creating the magnetic stations and using it. There's a great Sistema club in Auckland, New Zealand, if you're ever over there. Oh, I'd love to go there. I definitely am close to New Zealand. Stacy says, how would I do that? How would you create a memory palace in words? Well, I first would recommend that you make sure you take my course, and then in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, there's an FAQ section there, and that might be a good video to make. In many cases, if you're using the Magnetic Memory Method, you'll have wound up doing this anyway, but there could be a great way to do that. Julie Adams says, I'm enjoying this live session. How often do you do these live? Well, the YouTube one's infrequently with no schedule, but you're in the masterclass, so make sure that you get my emails, because there are live implementation sessions, and there's one coming up in September, and those are scheduled for masterclass members. And so you should have an email already. If not, let me know. I'm going to be creating a page in the masterclass for the registrations in the near future here. And then you'll just be able to pop in and get registered. And those will be on the, yes, the VIP emails. And if you didn't get it, please let me know. There's a problem that people have been having with email, and it's, I believe, Google's fault. I've talked to a number of email specialists, so I'm taking responsibility for it. But these days, you know, it's hard to get email through. People are telling me all the time they're not getting my emails, and I wish that I knew what exactly to do about it. But one thing that you can do is check in your spam. If you're using Gmail, there's like a promotions tab, and move my emails into your inbox. And apparently if you make a little folder for my stuff, and obviously be opening my emails, be responding, replying to them, interacting with them, clicking the links. Otherwise Google's gonna say, yeah, this isn't relevant to you and you won't be getting them, which is sad. And I know that everybody gets lots of email and so forth, but we've got to really be responsive to the things that we like and enjoy, because what ends up happening here is that Google's making decisions on your behalf based on your behavior, and right or wrong, that's what's happening, and it's why a lot of people aren't getting emails. I really think there's, I mean, we don't want to judge it or anything, but there's this interesting tension, and it makes one feel like they want to make judgment, but so much is being controlled by these powers that it reminds me a lot of Max Headroom and the network TV stuff, and how we really are against these giant corporations who are making decisions based on our behavior, and they're often not the right decisions, because those behaviors that we're engaged in are being shaped by the information they're throwing at us and the tests that they're doing, and then they start making it impossible for us to engage in the information that we want to, and it's really weird. So we got to educate ourselves about what's going on with the media, because if we're not educated, then we're going to be shaped by it, and they're going to have a lot easier time shaping our minds. And so this whole thing, back to the goldfish attention span, if attention span is being reduced, it's by us accepting and behaving in the ways that they're suggesting that we're behaving, and we're not doing enough digital fasting, or we're not taking a moment to reflect before we behave. Because a lot of people, for example, are clicking like on posts they're not even reading. This has been tested scientifically. They're clicking like before that they even read it, and they never read it. They're clicking share on things that they never actually enjoyed, and that's not really the foundation for a great world of great information. That's impulse sharing of information that you haven't even assessed for its value. That's called madness and insanity. So all of which is to say that if you're not receiving my emails, and I hope that you are, we need to understand how email works, and we need to understand that you may have subscribed to something, but Google has decided. And if you say, oh, well, I'm not using Google, think again. Google's got its fingers in everything. And Google really is deciding, even if you're using Hotmail, what emails you're getting. They're influencing it. So you need to be active, and you know, it's healthy and to unsubscribe from things you're not reading. But if you're subscribed to something and you're not reading it and you're not receiving it and so forth, then you need to look and investigate, because it's possible that the powers that be have made the decision that you're not interacting with it, and so they're not even going to show it to you. So, yeah, that's my little speech about that. Let's see. Ive is saying here, recently I remembered the names in kanji of 90 of my students. Tip top, congratulations, that's amazing. Excellent. Amazing, but totally predictable. Fantastic. I still congratulate you all the same. Drawing a map, getting all the stations. I wrote down a big list of all the stations in order and a description and the mnemonic at each station. I then got a text-to-speech app on my phone, and when I was walking around, I would listen to my phone read the file. It was a way of reviewing my memory palace with just words. Oh, that's great. Yes, I've done these things, similar things. It's great. It's great. It's great. Engage as many of your senses as you can. It's awesome. And then Stacy says, sounds amazing but confusing. Well, here's the thing, Stacy, and to all people. This is learned by doing. I know this might sound like not the most helpful thing in the world, but don't try and understand it. Just follow the steps. You'll never make a mistake, and you'll learn it by doing. If I had tried to learn this by understanding it, I never would have learned it, because I'm the kind of person that I just think too much. I think too much, and the thinking gets in the way of the doing. And I was so lucky to just want this skill of memory. And even though I didn't believe it, I was super skeptical. I just got in there and did it. And that's how you learn these things. Is not by thinking about it, not by judging it, not by even acknowledging for a second that it sounds difficult, because that's just going to make it even more difficult. But when you just say, okay, I acknowledge that this thought has come, now I'm going to go and do it, right? Your brain, it's normal for the brain to feel overwhelmed. There's something called the insular cortex that creates a pain response. It's trying to get you to save energy. If you just acknowledge it and then say, okay, now I'm going to follow the instructions. It happens to me every day when I try and do something with my website. Oh man, that looks difficult. Then I look it up and it's like, okay, well the first thing is you open this tab. Then you open this other tab. I remember a tech guy telling me one time, he was very helpful, very fundamental, part of the magnetic memory method family, but he just told me, he said, the honest truth is that tech guys, tech women, tech people, we are just better at using Google and then following the instructions. It's that simple. But often, and I learned how to get past it. And it was a great learning. Just follow the instructions. Don't think about it too much. Don't let this thing of like, oh, that seems difficult, be the barrier. Because if it seems difficult and you tell yourself that story, and you continue telling yourself that story, what you're doing is you're building a prison of inactivity. You're building a prison of inactivity, and then you are the jailer. Go and read it out loud if you have to, something called Before the Law by Franz Kafka. This is such a powerful story. It's such a powerful story because we're often waiting for some permission to do things, or we're creating the prison that's holding us back, and we can get out of it. We can get out of that prison and take action and not ever be held back. So if it sounds difficult or confusing, the way that you kill the confusion is you find step 1, you complete step 1, and you don't worry about step 2 in advance of completing step 1. Don't even worry about step 10. Review all the steps, read them. That's called priming the mind, so you know a little bit about where you're going, and then just get started. Mikhail says, I'm trying to have a station that I will remember numbers. Do I convert numbers to pictures like 1 to 500, for example? I need a big station. Mikhail, I think that's not really understanding the magnetic memory method. So that's not what a magnetic station is. That's not how they're used. If you're trying to build a PAO, a 00 or a 000 to 500, then that is an option. But you would use magnetic memory palaces differently and the stations very differently. So definitely consider taking the training to get clarity on that, because that's just not really quite in line with what I'm talking about. But you could definitely do a 00 or a 000 to 500 very quickly with memory palaces. It's just you wouldn't do it all on one station, and you don't need big stations. Stations can be very, very small and should be small, actually, ideally. depends though. A lot depends on how you're using the magnetic memory method. Remember, the magnetic memory method is called that for a reason. It's a method that you use to create your own memory palace systems. And you don't even have to think of them as systems, because we're not really going for system, we're going for method. It's very different. It's very different. It's more flexible, more responsive. Janet says, you've just reminded me that painting is meditative. Never realized that the reason I felt so content doing it was that. Yes, well, memory practice is also meditative, and it's very powerful. And painting certainly is very, very powerful. Painting, even just having a chat, these sessions that we have together, they're very meditative. They're very meditative, and they're also a way of practicing thought, practicing discussion. You never used to be able to do this. Hop on a call, chat with people all around the world, and now we're practicing that, and we're talking about it in the context of increasing happiness. And then the cool thing is it's recorded, can be revisited, or it can be forgotten and never revisited again. But it's just amazing. It's amazing what can be done, and it's very meditative to do it. And it's a lot of fun, and I appreciate the interaction that you all have brought to this process. And as we talked about earlier, this is very, very powerful for making this a much more exciting and interesting and powerful memory palace than it would be otherwise. And it's going to be so much more useful in my practice, because I not only took the time to do this and to do it in a meditative way, but because I'll now remember that we created it really essentially together, and we had this great conversation, and some interesting books were mentioned, some great a great podcast episode was mentioned. Really appreciate that. Be able to go and follow up with that, and then it becomes part of practice. It extends. If you were to follow up on just one of the books that was mentioned on this call, or one of that one podcast, or go into the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, follow up on all this, then that extends the extension that you're already practicing extending right now. This is why a course of study, a course of learning is called a course, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over time. And the more that we practice the practice of expanding our attention, expanding our knowledge, the more knowledge will expand all on its own, because you'll begin to percolate in your mind and make connections, and you'll have more connections to make. And they'll become more and more profound, and then your memory practice will get easier and easier and easier, because things will just pop right up. Speaking of which, the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass students are all getting together, those who can make it, next month in September for a live implementation boot camp, where we're going to actually have information we want to memorize. I'll have some stuff, and together we're going to come up with mnemonic imagery. So if you're not in the masterclass, you're going to want to take care of that, so you can be there, implementing together, and practicing our imagination together as a course of study. And I'm really excited about it, because one of the things that people often ask for are examples. But what's better? Someone else remembering for you, or getting together and coming up with not just one example from the head honcho here at the Magnetic Memory Method headquarters in Brisbane, but a bunch of us sharing our ideas together and really thinking through from multiple angles. And more importantly, it's not coming up with the mnemonic examples, it's practicing the practice of coming up with mnemonic examples. Because how you get good at it is that you do it. It's learned by doing. And the more you do, the faster and the sharper you'll be. And it's great mind exercise. It's great mental fitness. And the most important thing of all in this mind exercise and mental fitness is that when you direct it at your goals, when you direct it at learning information that's going to make your life better, then you're exercising your memory and you're improving your life all at the same time, because you'll develop fluency in that language that you've wanted to learn. You'll develop proficiency in that profession you've wanted to improve at. And you'll be developing your memory at the same time while experiencing real, meaningful, lasting memory improvement. That's the most exciting thing in the world. And it's the best thing that can happen to you, because none of us are getting any younger. We do have a unit, a physical body that we live in. The brain ages, and we need to keep it sharp. We need to keep it sharp. We need to keep it sharp, and we do that by using it. And too many brains are dulling out. They're getting rusty. People use their brains, they don't even use them in an optimized way, and then they put them in the brain cabinet, so to speak, and leave them there without drying them off, and they get dull and they get rusty. And then we wonder, we sit down to a learning task and we're like, whoa, this is so hard. We wonder why it's so hard. Well, not using your brain is a great way to make things hard. It's like going to the gym cold without being a person who practices regular, ongoing physical fitness. And then you wonder, oh, why does this feel so heavy? Or, oh, why are my muscles so stiff? Or why are my bones creaking? Well, if you're not using them, what do you expect? What do you expect? So my goal is to help people actually use these techniques. And so these live implementation boot camps, I think, is going to be a wonderful thing. Not sure why I didn't think of it earlier, but it's never too late. Always improving, constant improvement. Not a perfectionist, but a progressionist. That's what we all need to be. And so it goes at the Magnetic Memory Method headquarters. And I want to keep painting memory palaces because I think that I'm going to get a lot better at it. And then when you get better at something, you get more satisfaction out of it. And the more satisfaction that you get out of things, then the more encouraged you are to go and do them. And then you have a perfect circle. It's the engine that creates energy. And you never have to motivate yourself because the motivation is there. It's built in. It's perfect and beautiful and profound, unending and self-developing, and then much more likely to never get rusty, to never get dull. And your spatial memory, your autobiographical memory, your semantic memory, your episodic memory, your short-term memory, your long-term memory, they'll all get better. Some people say you can't improve your short-term memory, which I think is just false. You can improve your short-term memory. You can do it very easily. How? By using it. We know this. We know this. And this is what memory practice does, is it actually practices your short-term memory and you're encoding it into long-term memory much faster. You're massaging it in, and then you're actually making it possible to have this transition point, and you're making it easier because you're actually exercising your long-term memory using the mnemonic imagery, creating magnetic imagery with spatial memory, with your magnetic stations and your memory palaces. And then this is sort of like a short-term memory incubator as you extend and make it possible to do more quickly with greater capacity. And then when you get into some of the things like the pillar technique and you're doing recall rehearsal and so forth, of course your short-term memory is improved. It's improved tremendously, but you have the burden of using it. Because what we stop using or we don't use atrophies. That's just a law of nature. And that is the beauty of memory practice. It's an art, it's a science, and it follows the laws of nature. And if you don't use it, you will lose it. So I'm really glad that we had this time today together. I appreciate everyone being here, and I look forward to doing this again. I've done kindergarten now, and I've done grade 1. And what I realized is I didn't do preschool. So I can skip back and do preschool, but I might motor on with grade 2 after this. But I like this practice very much. It's unlocked so much autobiographical memory, and by spending this time together today, we came up with so many assets. So many wonderful assets. So if you hopped on late, the replay of this will be available on the YouTube channel. I hope you'll leave a comment. I hope you'll let me know if you checked out just one of those books that was mentioned or the podcast that came up, and develop the value. There's the accretion of value. Accretion, that's a very good word. And if you think of the ancient Greek term aletheia, which means unhiding, we can unhide so much of information that's already there, either within us already or out in the world to be discovered. Mikhail says, thanks. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all over at magneticmemorymethod.com. I hope you follow up on some of these resources that we mentioned. Use this as a resource. Send me images of your memory palace creations. That would be really great. Remember, just to quickly review, I chose this color because I remember very distinctly that the carpet was green. Janet says, thank you, Anthony. Love the conversation and meeting everyone else here as well. Excellent. Thank you, Janet. So great. And thank you for being a masterclass owner and supporter, and look forward to seeing you on the implementation that we're going to be doing in September. And yeah, I really appreciate you all so much. I'm really so grateful for every minute that I get to spend on this tradition of memory, being connected with the ancient world, this practice that has lasted so long, and thank goodness for that, and doing the work of making sure that it survives in this world of digital amnesia. And if you didn't catch the Digital Amnesia Takedown webinar, the replay is still available. So that's at magneticmemorymethod.com/data, D-A-T-A. And I'm not sure, it'll be around till the end of the month. So check that out. And yeah, thank you everybody. Really, really appreciate this, and I'm gonna go use this because I've already done my Chinese for today. I always do the Chinese. I always do my language study before the computer turns on, but I'm gonna go do a bit more because this memory palace is ripe and ready. And that's the thing, is use what you've created and don't let it slip through the cracks, because that's what'll happen. Things do slip through the cracks. Well, it's crap when it slips through the cracks. But use what you've created. Use this beautiful asset known as your mind and your memory, and it'll make your brain stronger. It'll make your brain more responsive, and you'll have so much more fun in life, and you'll be able to accomplish so much more. And remember, the more you remember, the more you can remember, and the more you learn, the more you can learn, because you have more to associate. You have more pleasure. So that question that I got is, can memory palace practice really make you happier? Oh yes, it can. And in fact, you just don't know just how happy it can make you until you dive in. And on this particular call, we connected it to so many other things. Meditation, great assets that you can go and follow up with and deeply, deeply enjoy and have greater happiness. And remember that definition of happiness as flourishing, as being probably more empowering than the modern definition of happiness, which is so loosey-goosey when you think about it. But if there is one thing that is guaranteed to create more happiness, it's your memory. And your memory is so wonderful. It's the perfect asset. And it's the perfect science because you're able to test it and you're able to really, really develop it through observation. In the same way you develop yourself, through self-observation. And how do you remember to do that? You practice your memory. So you get the best of both worlds. You get a great, let's call it spiritual practice, you get a scientific practice, and you get an artistic practice, all bound up into one. And more information about that, if you don't have it already, is at magneticmemorymethod.com. Thank you again for being here today. Until we have a chance to speak again, create a memory palace. If you need help, that's at magneticmemorymethod.com. And until we speak again, keep yourself magnetic. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.